6,000 defenders face 40,000 Ottoman warriors landing on their shores. Sails fill the horizon like an inevitable storm. 200 ships. Cannons that darken the Mediterranean sky. Experienced siege engineers who have already brought down the walls of Belgrade, Rhodes, and Constantinople. This should have been a massacre. It wasn't. May 28, 1565. The small island of Malta awakens to its greatest nightmare, but also to its greatest glory. This is the story of how 600 elite knights, 3,000 Maltese militiamen, and 2,300 hastily armed civilians faced the most powerful army in the world, and won. Not by luck, not by divine miracle, but through a lethal combination of geography weaponized, tactical ingenuity, and an absolute willingness to transform desperation into strategy. The Ottoman Empire in 1565 is an unparalleled war machine. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent is not called that out of modesty. His armies conquered Belgrade, Rhodes, Budapest. His navy dominates the Mediterranean. His engineers invented siege techniques that transform the most impressive fortifications into smoking rubble. When Suleiman decides Malta must fall, it's not a question of if, but when. The military logic is brutal and simple. 40,000 Ottoman soldiers against 6,000 defenders, more than 6 to 1. Heavy artillery that can fire granite projectiles the size of wine barrels. Sappers who can dig under any wall. Janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, trained from childhood to know only one word: victory. Malta has no standing army, no guaranteed allies, no escape route. What Malta has is Jean de Valette, 70 years old, Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, veteran of Rhodes, where he watched the Ottomans crush supposedly impenetrable defenses. Valette knows the enemy, knows their tactics, knows their cruelty, and knows something more important, knows their weaknesses. Because Malta possesses something no Ottoman map can fully capture. Geography that defies conventional military logic. The Grand Harbor, a natural gem of deep anchorage, protected by rocky promontories that funnel any invading force into predictable routes. Fort St. Elmo guarding the northern entrance like a clenched fist of stone. Fort St. Angelo dominating the inner waters. And between them, the fortified cities of Birgu and Senglea, built not on vulnerable plains, but on narrow peninsulas where superior numbers become a disadvantage. The Ottoman strategy is textbook perfect. Capture Fort St. Elmo first. Control the entrance to the Grand Harbor. Use that position to bombard the fortified cities into submission. Commander Mustafa Pasha, veteran of countless sieges, estimates 5 to 7 days for St. Elmo to fall, then another 2 weeks to crush the main resistance. Total estimated, 1 month, maybe less. Valette sees the same chessboard, reaches the opposite conclusion. St. Elmo is a small fortress. Garrison of 120 knights and 600 Maltese soldiers. Relatively thin walls compared to the main bastions. Isolated position, separated from the main body of defenses by water. Any sensible commander would sacrifice St. Elmo, concentrate forces on the main fortifications. Basic military logic. Valette orders the opposite. Defend St. Elmo, to the last man if necessary. His own knights question the order. This seems like suicide. It's strategic genius, because Valette understands something the Ottomans haven't yet realized. Time is the real weapon. Every day St. Elmo holds is a day that 40,000 Ottoman soldiers consume supplies. Every day is a day the Mediterranean summer advances, bringing rough seas that cut Turkish supply lines. Every day is a day that news of the siege travels through Europe, potentially mobilizing relief. And every day defending that small fortress allows Valette to further fortify the main defenses, prepare tactical surprises, and most importantly, demonstrate to the Maltese that resistance is not just possible, it's mandatory. The garrison of St. Elmo receives simple orders. Resist. Bleed the Ottomans. Transform every meter of stone into a nightmare the invaders will never forget. May 24th. 4 days before the main invasion, Ottoman advance units land in the north of the island, capturing strategic positions and establishing camps. The defenders of St. Elmo watch from the fortress as white tents sprout like poisonous mushrooms across the surrounding landscape. Thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. May 28th. The main fleet appears, 200 ships transform the sea into a forest of masts and sails. The landing takes 2 full days. Cavalry, infantry, sappers, heavy artillery hoisted on special barges, janissaries in their distinctive white uniforms, sipahi, elite cavalry, with armor that reflects the Mediterranean sun like assassin stars. June 1st. The bombardment begins. This isn't conventional artillery fire. It's industrialized hell. 60 heavy cannons focus fire on St. Elmo all at once. Granite balls the size of a man's head. Incendiary projectiles filled with Greek mixtures that stick to stone and burn hot enough to melt metal. The noise is deafening, constant, like thunder that never stops. Walls that took decades to build begin to crack in hours. But the walls are just stone. The defenders are another story. Knight Luigi Broglia, 32 years old, veteran of campaigns against Barbary pirates, commands sections of the northern wall. When Ottoman projectiles tear holes 10 feet wide, Broglia doesn't back down. He organizes repair teams working under direct fire, filling breaches with rubble, sandbags, anything they can grab. When a projectile takes off the head of the man beside him, Broglia keeps issuing orders like nothing happened. Maltese Captain Vincenzo Anastaghi, 45 years old, fisherman turned soldier, knows every inch of the surrounding rocky coast. He organizes nocturnal raids using small boats, hitting Ottoman encampments, stealing supplies, slitting sentries' throats. The raids cause no significant military damage. They cause something more valuable: fear. Ottoman soldiers begin sleeping with one hand on their swords, watching shadows, imagining how many silent Maltese are crawling through the darkness. And then there are the unconventional weapons. Greek fire, an ancient Byzantine recipe, kept secret by the Knights Hospitaller. A mixture of naphtha, sulfur, pine resin, and mystery ingredients that creates flames that water can't put out. Burns on any surface, sticks to skin like liquid fire. The defenders of St. Elmo prepare ceramic pots full of this hellish concoction, waiting for the right moment to use it. June 10th. 12 days of continuous bombardment have transformed sections of the fortress into lunar ruin. Mustafa Pasha orders the first general assault. 4,000 Ottoman soldiers, mainly janissaries, advance in dense formation. Siege ladders, mobile towers, absolute determination. The defenders wait until the Ottoman vanguard is 100 feet from the walls. Then they unleash hell. Greek firepots launched from makeshift catapults explode right in the middle of the attacking troops. Green and yellow flames spread like living liquid, sticking to uniforms, skin, equipment. Men covered in fire run screaming back to their own lines, spreading panic and flames with them. Maltese archers fire burning arrows into the staging areas, setting supply tents and ammunition depots on fire. The assault retreats. 400 Ottoman casualties, 12 defenders killed. Mustafa Pasha, watching from his command post, recalculates. 5 to 7 days his original estimate. Clearly insufficient. He orders doubled bombardment. 120 cannons now. 24-hour shifts. Turn St. Elmo to dust before the next assault. Inside the fortress, Broglia and Anastaghi inspect damage. Northern walls partially collapsed. Southeast tower leaning dangerously. Water reserves contaminated by debris. Medical supplies critically low. 60 men too wounded to fight effectively. Anastaghi asks the obvious question: how long can we really hold this place? Broglia wipes blood from his face, looks at the smoking ruins that were once strong walls, and smiles. A smile like a cornered wolf that still has teeth. Long enough to make the Ottomans regret they ever came here. Because in Birgu, across the harbor, Valette watches through a telescope as St. Elmo bleeds the Ottoman army. Each day is victory. Each Ottoman casualty is investment. And the real surprises have not yet begun. Additional fortifications arise around Birgu and Senglea. Not just walls, but layered defensive systems. Ditches filled with sharpened stakes, improvised landmines using buried gunpowder barrels, hidden artillery positions that can create crossfire kill zones, and in underground forges, Maltese blacksmiths work continuous shifts, producing more pots of Greek fire, more incendiary arrows, more weapons that will transform Ottoman numerical advantage into logistical nightmare. June 15th. Second general assault against St. Elmo. 6,000 Ottoman soldiers this time. Mustafa is no longer underestimating. He orders continuous covering barrage as troops advance. Sappers with explosives to demolish wall sections before infantry arrives. The defenders, now down to 500 combat-ready men, switch tactics. They don't try to hold the outer walls. They fall back to secondary defenses, prepared positions in the ruins. They turn the fortress itself into a death trap. Ottoman soldiers climb over the collapsed walls, expecting organized resistance. They find nothing. Empty ruins. Then, from hidden windows and underground passages, hell breaks loose. Musket fire coming from 5 directions at once. Greek fire launched from positions they can't even see. Maltese defenders who know every stone, every gap, every secret passage, turning their knowledge of the ground into a killing field. The assault lasts 6 hours. It ends with Ottomans theoretically controlling the outer fortress, but unable to eliminate defenders entrenched in the internal structures. Cost: 800 Ottoman casualties. 40 defenders. Mustafa Pasha convenes a war council. His commanders suggest the unthinkable. Abandon St. Elmo. It is a small fortress. Strategically important but not essential. Focus on the main defenses. Mustafa refuses, not for military logic, for pride. The Ottoman Empire does not retreat from fortresses defended by a few hundred arrogant European knights. He orders preparation for a third assault. This time, no holding back. 10,000 men, maximum artillery. Liquidate St. Elmo definitively. Scheduled date for final assault, June 23rd. Inside Fort Elmo, Broglia gathers the 150 defenders who can still hold a weapon. Supplies are almost gone. Ammunition is running out. The outer walls are completely destroyed. They can't communicate with Birgu because the Ottomans are bombing the water routes. They know they won't make it to July. They know that Valette cannot send reinforcements without compromising the main defenses. They know they are alone. And they know exactly what to do. Transform their final days into a legend that the Ottomans will recount with horror for generations. Because Malta isn't fighting for just stone and walls. It's fighting for the idea that numbers don't decide everything. That pure courage beats a bigger army. That when desperation becomes strategy, it becomes unstoppable. The Ottomans expected a quick victory. What they didn't expect was that Malta's defenders had transformed desperation into a weapon, and fire into an art form. The Ottomans thought it would be 7 days. They were about to face 31. Because what unfolded at Fort Elmo wasn't just a battle. It was a masterpiece of resistance, a brutal lesson in how to transform stone and fire into a devastating psychological weapon. And it all began with a decision that would change the course of the siege. While Ottoman cannons hammered Elmo's walls day after day, something unexpected happened. Jean de Valette, the 70-year-old Grand Master of the Order of St. John, made a choice that his commanders questioned. He ordered that reinforcements continue to be sent to Elmo through the harbor during the night. Small boats, sailing in the darkness, carrying fresh soldiers to replace the dead and wounded. It wasn't just about maintaining the fortress. It was about sending a message. Malta would not surrender. Not today. Not ever. And that message reached the Ottomans in the bloodiest way possible. Because when the first waves of Turkish soldiers finally scaled Elmo's damaged walls in early June, they discovered something no war manual had prepared them to face. Liquid fire. Malta's defenders had heated massive pots of pitch and oil on the fort's walls, and when the Ottomans started climbing, thinking they'd broken through the defenses, the knights tipped the pots over. Picture it. You're climbing a stone wall, your shield over your head, your friends next to you. Suddenly, hot black liquid falls on you. The pitch sticks to your skin, your clothes, burning through everything. You try to wipe it off, but that just spreads the fire more. Your screams mix with dozens of other soldiers, all covered in the same burning substance. And then you realize, you're not fighting men. You're fighting the walls themselves. The psychological impact was devastating. Ottoman soldiers began to hesitate before climbing. They looked up, trying to spot the cauldrons, calculating whether it was worth the risk. That half-second hesitation was all the defenders needed. An arrow, a spear. Another Ottoman life lost on Elmo's stones. But Malta had more tricks up its sleeve. Many more. Because while Mustafa Pasha regrouped his forces, planning the next assault, Malta's blacksmiths were working on something that had never been seen on a European battlefield: fire hoops. The idea was simple, but the execution was genius. The blacksmiths made metal rings big enough to fit over a man's head. They dipped them in oil, wrapped them in cloth soaked in pitch, and set them on fire. And when the Ottomans attacked again, the defenders threw these flaming rings over the climbing soldiers. Think about it for a second. You're an Ottoman soldier, climbing a wall with musket fire and arrows coming at you. Suddenly, something goes over your head and lands on your shoulders. A ring of burning metal. You try to pull it off, but it won't move. The fire burns your neck, your face, your arms while you're trying to get it off. And while you're fighting with it, unable to protect yourself, the defenders above you can take all the time they need to kill you. The fire hoops transformed soldiers into living human torches, and created a new kind of terror in the Ottoman ranks. Because it wasn't just death that awaited them. It was the possibility of dying burning, trapped in a metal ring you couldn't remove. Ottoman records from that period tell stories of soldiers who refused to climb, who preferred to face their commander's punishment rather than risk the flaming hoops. And when they were forced to attack, they did so with visible hesitation, constantly looking up, trying to anticipate where the next fire threat would come from. But Malta saved its most diabolical weapon for last: heated sand. Doesn't sound dangerous, right? Just sand. Something you find on any beach, in any desert. But in the hands of Elmo's defenders, sand became torture that would make grown men scream for mercy. Here's how it worked. The defenders heated sand in metal containers over fires until it was burning hot, almost glowing. Then, when the Ottomans climbed the walls, they poured this sand through the gaps in the soldiers' armor. Think about that for a second. Scalding sand pouring inside your armor. It falls through the joints, gets trapped in every fold of fabric, touches every part of your skin. And you can't get it out. The more you move, the more it spreads, burning more skin. Taking off the armor takes time you don't have while fighting on a wall. Ottoman soldiers jumped off the walls. Not because they were pushed, not because they were hit by normal weapons, but because the pain of the burning sand was so bad that jumping to their death seemed better. And that's the real genius of Malta's fire tactics. It wasn't just about killing enemies. It was about breaking their will to fight. Creating a fear so deep that even experienced soldiers would think twice before following orders to attack. But fire tactics were only half the equation. The other half was something Malta's architects had built into the very stones of the fort. Because Elmo wasn't just a fortress, it was a carefully designed killing machine. The star shape of the fort created angles that turned every approach into a kill zone. No matter which direction the Ottomans attacked from, they would always be exposed to fire from at least two sides. The walls protected each other, creating overlapping fields of fire where no attacker could find cover. The approach paths were narrow, channeling Ottoman forces into tight columns. And these columns were exactly where Malta's fire weapons caused the most damage. A single cauldron of pitch could cover dozens of men. A fire hoop thrown into a tight formation could cause panic that spread like the fire itself. And the multiple defensive layers meant that even when the Ottomans breached one wall, they found themselves facing another, and another, each defended by men who knew every stone, every angle, every choke point. Elmo's design turned every meter gained into a bloody nightmare, and at the center of that nightmare was a man whose leadership would become legendary. Jean de Valette was 70 years old when the siege started, an age when most men would have been home relaxing, telling old stories. But Valette wasn't telling stories. He was making them. Because while some commanders stayed in the back, giving orders from safe places, Valette fought on the front lines. He swung his sword next to men 40, 50 years younger than him. And when soldiers saw their Grand Master, a man who could have stayed safe because of his age, choosing to be right where the fighting was worst, something changed in their heads. They couldn't run, not with Valette next to them, not with a 70-year-old man fighting harder than soldiers in their best years. And Valette understood something many commanders failed to grasp, that in a war of endurance, time is worth more than territory. Every day Elmo held was one less day for the Ottomans to attack the main fortifications. Every Ottoman casualty at Elmo was one less soldier for the real siege. So Valette traded space for time. He allowed the Ottomans to gain meters of the outer walls, knowing each meter would cost Turkish blood. He retreated when necessary, but always to prepared positions, always making the next Ottoman advance as costly as the last. It was strategic patience combined with tactical ferocity. And it was working. But even the most brilliant resistance has its limits. Because as days became weeks, Elmo's walls were falling apart. Ottoman cannons worked non-stop, day and night, smashing the fortifications into rubble. Defenders fixed the holes at night, only to watch them get blasted open again the next day. And men were dying, not just in battle, but from exhaustion, from infections in the Mediterranean heat, from sickness spreading in the packed fortress. June 23, 1565. 31 days after the first Ottoman cannon fired, Fort Elmo fell. But not quietly, not easily, and certainly not cheaply. When Ottoman flags finally went up over the ruins of Elmo, Mustafa Pasha counted his losses, and what he found shocked him. 8,000 men, 1/5 of his whole army, dead or wounded so badly they couldn't fight, all to take one small fortress he thought would fall in a week. 8,000 lives for 31 days, and worse, Elmo wasn't even the main target, it was just the beginning. Malta's true fortifications, Birgu and Sanglea, were still intact, fully defended, waiting. Mustafa Pasha understood right then that this wasn't a quick war anymore. This was going to be a war of grinding down the enemy. And grinding down works better for the defender, not the attacker. Because he had to feed, supply, and keep morale up in tens of thousands of men on an island that wasn't theirs, Malta's defenders were fighting at home. Every stone was familiar. Every path was theirs. And more than anything, every day that went by brought reinforcements closer to arriving. But there's something Mustafa Pasha didn't know. Something Malta's defenders had won with their blood and fire on the walls of Elmo. It wasn't just time they had bought, it was fear. Because now, every Ottoman soldier looked at Malta's main fortifications and wondered, if a small fortress cost 8,000 lives, how much would the large ones cost? How long would it take? And more importantly, was it even worth it? These questions, planted by 31 days of fierce resistance, would begin to erode Ottoman determination from within. The siege was far from over. But 31 days of fire and blood had transformed the calculus of war. The Ottomans had the numbers, Malta had the will, and somewhere across the Mediterranean, a relief force was preparing to set sail. With Fort St. Elmo finally in their hands, the Ottomans now turned their attention to the true heart of Malta's defense, Fort St. Angelo and the three cities. And this time, they brought with them the same incendiary weapons that had turned St. Elmo into an inferno. But now, on a much larger scale. Mustafa Pasha ordered his forces to completely surround Birgu and Sanglea. The Ottoman cannons, which had already reduced St. Elmo to rubble, now aimed at the city's walls. Incendiary projectiles rained down day and night. The sky over Malta had become permanently tinged orange and red, but something had changed. Malta's defenders were no longer just resisting. They were adapting, improvising, turning every challenge into opportunity. And it was here that Malta revealed its most powerful weapon, the people themselves. Maria, 42 years old from Birgu, and homeless from the bombing, started organizing women and children. Under constant Ottoman fire, they carried ammunition from the storage to the walls. Boxes of cannonballs, bags of gunpowder, bottles of oil for the fire weapons. They ran through rubble while projectiles exploded around them. Giovanni, 70 years old and a fisherman from Sanglea, had lost 3 sons defending Fort Elmo. Now he ran one of the fire weapon stations on the walls, pouring boiling oil on Ottoman troops climbing up. His old hands shook, but his aim never missed. Catherine, only 12, ran messages between commanders. Her small size let her move fast through the narrow streets and tunnels under the cities, carrying important orders before slower adults could get caught. This was no longer just a battle of knights. Every person in Malta had become a soldier. Every hand contributed to the defense. And this collective determination was something the Ottomans had not anticipated. Jean de Valette, walking along the ruined walls, told his men, "They have numbers. We have something numbers cannot buy, a reason to fight." But while courage inflamed the defenders, another factor was working silently in Malta's favor. An invisible but devastating factor: logistics. Ottoman supply lines were at the breaking point. Every ship bringing reinforcements, ammunition, and food had to cross the whole Mediterranean. Storms made deliveries late. Christian pirates attacked supply ships. And Malta, even though it was surrounded, got supplies from Sicily on small fast boats that snuck through the Ottoman blockade at night. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean summer turned into a weapon. The brutal heat of August cooked Ottoman soldiers in their tents. Disease spread through the camps: dysentery, typhoid fever, heat sickness. Bodies piled up faster than they could bury them. By August 1565, Ottoman records showed something shocking. Soldiers were dying from disease as much as they died in battle. For every man killed by Malta's fighters, another died burning with fever in a tent. Ottoman morale was falling apart. They came expecting a quick takeover. Now they were stuck in a long siege against an enemy that wouldn't give up. Mustafa Pasha knew time was running out. He ordered attacks that were more and more desperate against the three cities' walls. Waves of janissaries rushed at the defenses, but got pushed back by heavy fire, boiling oil, and the hard fighting of the defenders. On September 7, 1565, an Ottoman observer in the hills north of Malta saw something that froze his blood. Sails, dozens of them, on the horizon. The Sicilian fleet had arrived. 8,000 fresh soldiers landed on Malta's north coast. Well-fed, well-armed troops ready to fight. And they went straight toward Ottoman positions. Mustafa Pasha got the report in his tent. He looked at his officers. They understood what those numbers meant. The Ottomans started with 40,000 men. Now, after months of hard fighting, disease, and losses, they had fewer than 20,000 soldiers ready to fight. Many were weak, sick, worn out. And now they had to face 8,000 fresh soldiers, plus the Maltese who were still fighting. The math was simple. Continuing meant risking total defeat. On September 8, 1565, the order went through the Ottoman camp. Get out. Right now. Ottoman soldiers rushed onto their ships, some in order, most in panic. They left behind tents, cannons, anything to get on board faster. From the broken walls of Birgu and Senglea, the Maltese defenders watched them leave. Men who had fought non-stop for 4 months, who had lost families, friends, homes, who faced impossible odds and won. They came out of the rubble, thin and exhausted, covered in soot and blood, wounded but not defeated, victorious. 40,000 invaders had landed on Malta in May. Now, in September, fewer than 10,000 left the island alive. So how exactly did 6,000 beat 40,000? First, geography. Malta wasn't just an island, it was a natural fortress. The Ottomans had to fight on ground that favored the defenders. Every hill, every harbor, every fortress was set up to give defenders the advantage. The Ottomans couldn't use their bigger numbers because the land itself forced them into killing grounds. Second, being smarter. Creative weapons, night attacks, constant changes in tactics. Malta didn't win by having more soldiers. They won by being more inventive, more adaptable, and more willing to try new things when they were under pressure. Third, leadership and shared will. Jean de Valette didn't just give orders. He inspired. He fought with his men, lived like they did, and showed them that he wouldn't ask them to do anything he wouldn't do. And the people of Malta answered back. Everyone, from the best knights to the kids carrying messages, became part of a defense that wouldn't stop. And fourth, patience. Malta knew something important. They didn't have to destroy the Ottomans. They just had to stay alive long enough for disease, hunger, and time to do it for them. Every day they held was another day Ottoman soldiers died from fever. Every week brought the chance of a storm sinking supply ships. They gave up ground to buy time, lost forts to gain days, took losses to keep alive. And it worked. The siege of Malta's effect lasted centuries. The Ottoman Empire never got back control of the Mediterranean. The loss at Malta broke the idea that they couldn't be stopped. Other European nations saw that you could beat the Ottomans. Malta became a symbol that will and intelligence could beat a much bigger enemy. Military leaders studied Malta's defense for generations to understand how such a small force beat such overwhelming odds.